and friends of Private Rhys Miller from the 1st Battalion, the Yorkshire Regiment, who died on the 30th of June while on operations in Estonia as a result of a non-battle injury. Private Miller served his country with great distinction, and that service will not be forgotten. Mr. Speaker, this week marks 70 years since the NHS was founded. It's rightly one of the nation's most loved institutions, and I would like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to and recognise the dedication and hard work of NHS staff across the country. And finally, Mr. Speaker, the country witnessed a very rare and welcome event last night. The England football team winning a penalty shootout. Can I say, I think the explosion of relief and most of all joy could be felt up and down the country, not just in the smoking room of the House of Commons. And I want to congratulate Gareth Southgate and his team on a great performance. Last week I promised to fly the flag of St George above number 10 for all of England's remaining matches in the World Cup, and I know the whole House will want to join me in wishing the England team the best of luck in Saturday's quarter-final. Let's keep that flag flying. And, Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Tommy Shepherd.
Scotland Act transferred responsibility for the Crown Estate in Scotland to the Scottish Government. But a large retail park in my constituency called Fort Kinnaird was exempted from the transfer on the grounds that it was tied up with a private joint venture. Last month, the government sold the Crown Estate's interests in Fort Kinnaird for the receipt of £167 million. And last week, the Treasury confirmed to me that none of that money would go to the Scottish Government, but it would be retained here in London. Can I ask the Prime Minister to review that decision in order that the proceeds from the sale of a major public asset in Scotland's capital city are given to the people of Scotland?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman that my understanding is that when he says the money has come to the government, it is actually money that has gone to the Crown Estate. But I'm happy to look at that and to clarify that point in writing to him.
McLean.
Mr. Speaker, after last night, I'm sure there's one question I don't need to ask the Prime Minister, which is, does she believe that football is coming home? So the one question I will ask her, does she also agree that another great victory for our United Kingdom is the BAE contract? And what does she think that means for jobs up and down the country in the manufacturing supply chain after we leave the EU?
Can I say to the honourable lady, I sincerely hope, actually, that members across the whole of this House will be congratulating England's success and welcoming England's success. But my honourable friend is absolutely right also to highlight this excellent news that Australia has selected the Global Combat Ship Australia as the preferred tenderer for their future frigate programme. The scale and nature of this contract puts the UK at the forefront of maritime design and engineering, demonstrates what can be achieved by UK industry and government working hand in hand. And it's the start of a new era in strategic defence industrial collaboration between the UK and Australia, which will be reinforced by the forthcoming defence industrial dialogue. As we leave the EU, we will be able to... As we leave the European Union, we have an opportunity as a UK to build on that closer relationship with allies like Australia, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I share the Prime Minister's tribute to Private Rhys Miller, who died while serving in the 1st Battalion, the Yorkshire Regiment. Our thoughts are with his family, his friends, and of course the entire regiment. I spent the weekend congratulating the NHS on its 70th birthday in Nye Bevan's birthplace. And the message from the crowd there was, the NHS is great, let's fund it properly. And whilst we're speaking of emergency services, Mr. Speaker, I do think we should send a message from this House of our thanks and support to all those firefighters tackling these huge fires on Saddleworth Moor and Winter Hill. And of course I congratulate the England team on a fantastic performance last night. Wish them well on Saturday in the match against Sweden. Mr. Speaker, with fares rising above inflation, passenger numbers falling and services being cut, does the Prime Minister accept her failure on yet another public services, the buses?
Can I first of all say to the right honourable gentleman that I absolutely agree with him, and I'm sure all members of this House, that our thanks should go to the firefighters and the troops who have been struggling to deal with these terrible fires that we have seen on the moorlands in the north of Britain. On the point about the buses, I would merely point out to him that actually I think we should look at the responsibility that local authorities have up and down this country for the buses. But can I also just comment on a remark that the right honourable gentleman made about putting sufficient funding into the National Health Service? At the last election, the Labour Party said that giving the NHS an extra 2.2% a year would make it the envy of the world. Well, we're not giving it an extra 2.2% or indeed 2.5% or 3%. We're giving it an extra 3.4% a year. Now he tries to say that's not enough. What should we believe? What he said before the election or what he says after the election?
Jeremy Corbyn!
Mr. Speaker, in case the Prime Minister had forgotten, my question was about buses. And since 2010, her government has cut 46% from bus budgets in England. Passenger numbers are falling, and amongst elderly and disabled, it's fallen by 10%. Her government belatedly committed to keeping the free bus pass, but a bus pass isn't much use if there isn't a bus. So does the Prime Minister think it's fair that bus fares have risen by 13% more than inflation since 2010?
The right honourable gentleman. He says that he asked originally in his first question about buses. He did indeed, and I gave him an answer in reference to buses. But what he cannot do is simply stand up and make assertions about what the government is doing without expecting those to be challenged, which is exactly what I did on his funding for the National Health Service. What we have seen across the country, and it was right that we made that commitment in relation to bus passes. What we have seen across the country is that we are seeing that as people's working habits are changing, that we are seeing people less usage of buses around the country. But this is something that we work with local authorities on. There are many responsibilities that local authorities have in relation to buses, and I suggest that he ask some of those local authorities what they're doing about the buses in their own area.
Corbyn!
Mr. Speaker, under this government, fares have risen 3 times faster than people's pay. Bus users are often people on lower income whose wages are lower than they were 10 years ago in real terms and have suffered a benefit freeze. And this government, under their stewardship, has cut 500 bus routes every year, leaving many people more isolated, lonely and damaging our local communities. Does the Prime Minister believe that bus services are a public responsibility or just something you leave to the market?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, and I made the point on 2 occasions about the responsibilities that others have in relation to buses. So he might, for example, look at what the Mayor of London, who I last looked at was a Labour politician, is doing in relation to buses in London. But he talks also about the impact of fares on low-income people. It is important that we consider the situation of people who are on low incomes. That's why it is this government that introduced the national living wage and has increased the national living wage. That is why it is this government that has taken 4 million people out of paying income tax altogether. That is helping people on low incomes in this country.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Mr. Speaker, when Sadiq Khan ran for Mayor of London, he promised to freeze bus fares, and you know what he's done? Frozen bus fares. If she's concerned... If she's concerned about the travel card fares, speak to the Secretary of State for Transport. He's the one that sets that fare. Mr. Speaker, bus routes are being wiped out. 26 million fewer journeys made across the north of England and the Midlands under her government. So much for a northern powerhouse and a Midlands engine. Can we be clear? Does the Prime Minister think that deregulation of the bus industry, putting profit before passengers, has been a success or a failure?
Right Honourable Gentleman, he talks about what the Mayor of London has done. What have we seen on the number of people using buses in London? It's gone down under the current Mayor. But if he wants to talk about what mayors are doing, I'm very happy to talk about what Andy Street, the Conservative in the West Midlands, has done. He's extended free bus fares to apprentices and students.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Mr. Speaker, it'll be a Labour government that saves the bus industry and a Labour government that gives free fares to under 26-year-olds. Mr. Speaker, the truth is, since deregulation, fares have risen faster than inflation, ridership has fallen, and these private bus monopolies have made a profit since 2010 of £3.3 billion. That's what the Tories give you in public transport. The government has given Metro mayors the powers to franchise and regulate to secure better services. Why won't the government extend that power to all local authorities?
To the Right Honourable Gentleman that, of course, the local authorities do have some responsibilities and capabilities in relation to subsidising bus routes and fares. And yes, we have given those powers to the Metro mayors. But can I also say to the Right Honourable Gentleman, he talked a little earlier about reference what was happening in the Northern Powerhouse and the Midlands Engine. I'll tell him what's happening in the Northern Powerhouse and the Midlands Engine. More investment in our public transport, more investment in our roads, more investment in the infrastructure that brings jobs to people in the north and people across the Midlands.
Jeremy Corbyn!
It's a shame this government is so shy of giving powers to local authorities and instead more interested in cutting their resources. But, Mr. Speaker, under this government, bus services are in crisis. Fares are increasing, routes being cut, passenger numbers falling, isolating elder and disabled people, damaging communities, high streets, and actually leading to more congestion in our towns and cities. People spending more time travelling to work or school. It's bad for our climate change commitments, bad for our air quality. So will the Prime Minister at last recognise the crucial importance of often the only mode of transport available for many people and end the cuts to bus budgets and give councils the power to ensure everyone gets a regulated bus service wherever they live?
The Right Honourable Gentleman, I'll take no lessons from the Right Honourable Gentleman in devolution to local authorities. Which party is it that has established those Metro mayors and given them those powers? It's the Conservative Party in government. Which party is it that is doing growth deals around the country, giving new responsibilities and local authorities? It is this Conservative government. And what did we see in the North East? When we were talking to Labour councils in the North East about them having a devolution deal, Labour council leaders in the North East rejected that devolution. That's what the Labour Party is doing. He wants to know what this government is delivering for the people of this country, for the North, the South, the Midlands, for every part of this country. Record high employment, rising wages, falling borrowing, stronger environmental protection and a Britain fit for the future.
Mr. Scottman! Harass, Mr. Speaker. Wait for a bus question and then 7 come at once. There's another one coming. This morning, my office manager walked with parents from Delabold to St James School. This is a route that Cornwall Council have deemed to be safe and within government guidance, and the parents have been refused free public transport for their kids. It's 7 miles, 3 miles there and 3 miles back. The road has no pavements, no street lighting, and in winter months the children will be asked to walk to and from school in the dark on a single track road with cars, tractors and lorries. There are similar stories all around Cornwall. Will the Prime Minister look at these guidance and talk to Cornwall Council and see what can be done?
Well, can I say to my honourable friend, obviously we are, as I've indicated, committed in recognising the responsibilities that local authorities have in these matters, and we've committed to providing them with the funding they need. We've increased the funding for Cornwall for 2019-20 by over 12 million since 2015-16. As I say, it's a matter for the local authority to decide how to spend their funding and to make decisions on local matters. But I agree with him and would encourage local authorities to make sure that in doing that, they are absolutely taking into account the wishes and concerns of the communities that they serve, including the community that my honourable friend has referred to.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a football fan, can I congratulate England on their very fine victory in the World Cup?
Order. It's very unfair on the leader of the Scottish National Party. Order! And I remind the House, or indeed I inform the House, almost certainly for the first time, that we are today visited by an American state senator and his wife, whom I had the great privilege of meeting earlier this morning. I'm sure we will wish to impress the two of them with the quality of our behaviour. Mr. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and perhaps on American Independence Day we should welcome the Senator. Can I congratulate England on their very fine victory in the World Cup last night? And wish them all the best in their coming games. Mr. Speaker, this morning we have learned that Vote Leave is expected to be found guilty of breaking electoral law. Does the Prime Minister agree that we need absolute transparency in elections and that people must be held accountable?
Well, can I say to the Right Honourable Gentleman, firstly, can I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for the congratulations and best wishes that he's given to the England team. On the issue that he refers to, I'm not going to comment on, and I'm sure honourable members will understand, I'm not going to comment on what appears to be a leaked report which the government has not seen. The Electoral Commission, in relation to the Vote Leave matter, has said that it will consider representations it's received and will publish a thorough and detailed closing report in order to provide a balanced account, and will of course consider that report when the government receives it, and will also consider any recommendations arising from it when it's released.
Ian Blackford.
Speaker, of course, it's the principle which is important. Our democracy cannot and must not be bought. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives are systematically shielding their donations from public scrutiny. Jackson Carlaw, MSP for Eastwood, the Honourable Member for Banff and Buchan, the Honourable Member for Murray, have all accepted donations from the Scottish Unionist Association Trust. The Trust has donated 319,000 people to the Scottish Conservatives, yet there is no information available about who the people are who currently manage the Trust, no public accounts to indicate who its donors are or what assets it holds. The BBC has revealed that the former Vice-Chairman of the Conservative Party in Scotland, Richard Cook, was behind the DUP's £435,000 donation during the EU referendum and has a trail of involvement in illegal activity and foreign money. I'm now giving the Prime Minister...
I think the Right Honourable Gentleman's finished his question. Yeah, he finished, yeah. Can I just say to the Right Honourable Gentleman that I very much hope and trust that he has advised those members in advance, as he's referred to them, but I know he's approaching his peroration and he'll be sensitive to the fact that the House wants that. Mr. Blackford.
You have indeed, Mr. Speaker. I'm now giving the Prime Minister the chance to tell us what checks the Scottish Tory Party had in place before accepting such large donations, and will she investigate the links between the Conservative Party and a trust and promise to publish a list of all donations and donors?
I can tell the Right Honourable Gentleman that all donations to the Scottish Conservative Party are accepted and declared in accordance with the law. And the Scottish Conservative Party works with the Electoral Commission to make sure that that is all done properly.
Gillian Keegan.
Domestic abuse is an act of brutality, often hidden in plain sight, and it affects 1 in 4 women and 1 in 4 men across this country. Last week, saw the launch of the Employers' Initiative on Domestic Abuse, and 170 companies and some MPs have signed up to train their employees to spot the telltale signs and to help provide much-needed support. Could I ask the Prime Minister to support this initiative and also to encourage more MPs and businesses across the country to sign up?
Can I say to my honourable friend, she's raised a very important issue. And of course, as she has said in her question, this is something for which we see many women being victims, but also men can be victims of domestic abuse too. And I certainly welcome the efforts of the Employers' Initiative in raising awareness of this issue, but also in that vital work of providing advice and support to employers and employees on the steps they can take to address it. I understand that my honourable friend, the Minister for Crime, Safeguarding and Vulnerability and Minister for Women, attended the launch of a toolkit for employers on tackling domestic abuse recently, which was developed in partnership with the Employers' Initiative, with Public Health England and business in the community, and I would absolutely encourage members from all sides of this House as employers to sign up to the initiative, but also to promote it in their constituencies so that we can take every step we can to root out domestic violence and domestic abuse.
Roberta Blackman-Woods.
Trump has recently locked up children in cages, instigated a ban on Muslims, stalled action on climate change, started trade wars and is now threatening women's reproductive rights. So shouldn't the Prime Minister be challenging his divisive, damaging policies and instead of inviting him for tea and cakes at number 10?
The Honourable Lady, that we have indeed, and I have, responded to the points that she has raised. I've been very clear, and I've said that in this House, for example, on the action that was taken against child migrants, that was not acceptable. It's not something we would do here in the UK. We did not consider that was acceptable. But she wants me to challenge the President of the United States. What better way to challenge the President of the United States than to be able to sit down and talk to him about it?
Mr. Simon Clarke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I really look forward to welcoming Heather Stephen, the practice manager at Loftus GP Surgery, to my right honourable friend's Downing Street reception for the NHS later. Can she assure the House that as part of this government's record investment in the NHS, she will ensure that primary care services receive all the support that they need?
Yes, can I say to my honourable friend that the intention and what will happen with this increase in the NHS budget is that we see it directed to frontline and primary services. We need to have this long-term plan. The NHS is developing that long-term plan itself. The budget will have increased by 2023-24 with an extra £20 billion a year in real terms compared with today. But it is that in that 10-year plan that will be led by doctors that we will make sure we're delivering world-class care for everyone, and that plan must also make sure that every penny is well spent.
Marcia de Cordova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning, the head of the National Audit Office took the unprecedented step of writing an open letter to the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, setting out how she has misled Parliament in 3 respective statements. She has made over universal credit. The Ministerial Code is very clear that, and I quote, "It is of paramount importance that ministers give accurate and truthful information to Parliament, correcting any inadvertent error at the earliest opportunity. Ministers who knowingly mislead Parliament will be expected to offer their resignation to the Prime Minister." Has she?
As the Honourable Lady said, it's very clear that ministers should correct the record in Parliament, and the Welfare Secretary will be correcting the record, as I believe she has advised you, Mr. Speaker, after PMQs at the dispatch box.
Mr. Robert Goodwill.
On Saturday in Llandudno, the Prime Minister received a warm welcome as the nation paid tribute to our brilliant armed forces. It's great news that Valiant Salisbury will host the event next year, and we're absolutely delighted that Britain's premier resort, Scarborough, will be the location of the National Armed Forces Day event in 2020. So could I ask the Prime Minister if she's looking forward to coming to Scarborough as much as we're looking forward to welcoming her on the 27th of June 2020? And does she suspect, like me, that the Leader of the Opposition will already have put the date in his diary, as no doubt he'll be planning to wash his hair that day again?
Can I say to my honourable friend, it was indeed a great privilege to attend Armed Forces Day in Llandudno on Saturday, and it was a fantastic celebration. Obviously, other events took place up and down the country, but it was a great opportunity to recognise the bravery, the professionalism of our armed forces, the wonderful job that they do day in and day out for us, putting themselves on the line and making sacrifices for our safety. I'm delighted that Salisbury and Scarborough will be hosting the day in 2019 and 2020 respectively. As regards Scarborough, Armed Forces Day will give people yet another reason for wanting to visit the great resort of Scarborough in 2020, and I certainly look forward to continuing to celebrate Armed Forces Day in the future and to be able to join him in celebrating it in Scarborough.
Alex Norris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The nursery at Basement Hall College is well used, it's well rated, and it helps parents access further education. Despite this, Nottingham College are planning to close it. Our campaign to stop this is backed by 1,800 local residents and by our local councillors. Does the Prime Minister agree with them that we must remove all barriers to accessing further education? And will she support our call for the college to revisit this decision?
I say to the honourable gentleman that I haven't seen the details of the particular case, the issue around this college that he has raised. On the general point, I think it is important that we make sure that education, further education, higher education, is available to people and is available to people whatever their background, whatever their circumstances, and whatever, as I say, whatever their particular circumstances, because I do want to see a country where how far people go in life is about them, it's about their talents, and it's about their willingness to work hard, and not where they've come from or not what their circumstances are.
Andrew Lua.
Mr. Speaker, would the Prime Minister join
We're going to leave Prime Minister's questions because we're getting more details on that incident near to Salisbury, which has left 2 people in a critical condition. Police have been saying that they have been taken to hospital, that they are critically ill, having taken an unknown substance. We're now hearing that tests are being carried out on the substance at the government's Chemical Weapons Research Laboratory at Porton Down, and also that counter-terrorism officers are now involved in the investigation. Metropolitan Police have put out a statement saying that given the recent events in Salisbury, officers from the counter-terrorism network are working jointly with colleagues from Wiltshire Police regarding the incident.